I will tell you what, in February, I took 2 weeks off of swimming just because I couldn't get to the pool. Work was in the way. The pool got closed. There's just a lot of things that happen in your regimen. And then you finally step back and take a break and you're like, maybe I needed that break, and maybe it's okay to miss a workout here or there, miss a workout there, and spend the time with the family or spend your time with your wife, because they let us do a lot of the training and get it done. But they also need to come before that as well.
Hello, my name is Jeff Sankoff. I'm an emergency physician, triathlete, triathlon coach, and multiple Ironman finisher. And this is the Tri Doc podcast for May the 3rd, 2024. Coming to you, as always, from beautiful, sunny Denver, Colorado. We had an interesting weekend this past weekend in triathlon, with the Ironman Texas taking place in somewhat challenging weather conditions. And we saw an unknown relatively come to the front and win on the men's side, and a stalwart finishing behind him in second. And on the women's side, we had a well-known quantity finishing atop the podium. We saw a Mexican by the name of Thomas Rodriguez Hernandez, the same gentleman who ran his way up into the top 5 last year at the Boulder 70.3. He raced in Oceanside just a couple of short weeks ago and finished 45th, but had an unbelievable marathon. He ran a 2:34 and beat Matt Hansen's time by 25 seconds. And he came from 5th on the bike and managed to run himself well into first and take the tape. Also running from well back after the swim and the bike was Patrick Lang, who also had a tough day at the office back in Oceanside, but came all the way to second place and actually might have been able to take Hernandez down had he not run out of real estate. On the women's side, Kat Matthews returned from a leg injury that she sustained at the T100 in Miami and came back from just a little bit behind after the bike and ended up having a very solid run, demonstrating that her injury is behind her, and she ended up taking the tape on the day. Other news of interest from the world of triathlon: the St. Anthony's Tri took place, and friend of the podcast, Matt Sharp, had a terrific day, completing his day with a 32-minute 10K. The difference between second and fifth was 28 seconds. Matt ended up in 4th place, but that 10K run is just ridiculous. Matt showing that he is in excellent early season form, and I look forward to seeing him back on a 70.3 course sooner rather than later to see what he can show when he gets to the longer distance. I wanted to give you an update on the Form goggles that I spoke to you about on the last podcast when I mentioned that I was intrigued enough to actually buy a pair. So I got the goggles, and I regret to say that they were simply not for me. I know that puts me in a small camp, a bit of a minority when it comes to the Form goggles, and this is not to dissuade anybody who is considering getting them. I am merely relating my own experience, which I have to admit was quite disappointing. I was really looking forward to getting them. I am a data hound, just like many of you are out there, and I was really looking forward to having my data from my swim actually visible while I was in the pool, and looking forward to trying the Swim Straight feature, which I have heard from several people works really well for them. However, I initially had trouble just getting the goggles to fit properly. Now, that's not unusual. Apparently, it takes some time of changing the nose pieces and getting the straps right, but I was able to manage that after probably 20 minutes of trial and error in the pool. But even once I got the goggles fitting right so that they weren't leaking anymore, the goggles gave me a really nasty headache. And I couldn't tell if it was the display that was just like causing me to have this headache, or if it was the goggle fit itself. Whatever it was, I didn't like the display at all. I found the display to be actually kind of annoying. I didn't want that data there all the time. I found that it was distracting, and that I was paying more attention to that than I was actually paying attention to my swimming. And I would say after about 2/3 of the swim was over, I just had enough of it, and I turned it off because it was just so bothersome. And after that, I finished my swim, felt like I was swimming significantly better when I didn't have these numbers constantly in my visual field. And then as soon as I was done, packed up the goggles and basically sent them back to Form because I really, the headache was the number one thing that bothered me. And again, I can't say for sure if it was the fit of the goggles, if it was the display that was causing me to have this headache, whatever it was disconcerting enough that I wasn't going to keep them. It just was too much of an issue. But even without a headache, I didn't like the screen. I just did not like having the numbers there. I didn't find that the numbers they were giving me were particularly helpful while I was swimming. And honestly, like I said, they were distracting and I didn't enjoy having them there. Now, I've spoken to a couple of different people who are listeners to this podcast with whom I have discussed the Form goggles prior to buying them. And they said to me that they kind of found the screen a little bit distracting at first, but that they got over it and eventually came to really enjoy having it there. And it's possible that I would have felt the same had I not had the headache and been able to work through it. But the fact of the matter is that I just didn't like them enough. And I wasn't going to pay the $8.50 or whatever it was to pay every month to have that just so that I could maintain really the one feature that I was interested in, which was the swim straight, which I haven't tried because I sent the goggles back before getting to try those. Now, again, this is not meant as a formal review. This is not meant to dissuade anybody who is interested in getting them. My sense is that the vast majority of people who get these goggles really enjoy them. I am just giving you the one person's experience because I promised you I would after I bought them originally. On the show today, there is a medical mailbag that is going to have a special guest. Juliet and I are going to be joined by nutritionist and dietitian Alex Larson, who has been on the podcast a couple of different times before. And she is here to discuss with us something that has had triathletes abuzz over the past several weeks, and that is the replacement on Ironman courses around North America of Gatorade Endurance formula with Mortal Hydration. What does this switch mean for triathletes and how should we be dealing with it? Well, we're going to discuss all of that, and that's coming up in just a few short moments. Later, I'm joined by a relatively new triathlete, an age grouper by the name of Tyler Pedersen. Tyler is sort of an everyman when it comes to triathlon. He has the experience that most of us had as an adult onset swimmer, someone who didn't really know how to swim, someone who really didn't enjoy running, and yet found himself interested in getting into multisport. I really enjoyed hearing his experience about what he's learned in getting into this sport and seeing how training has benefited him so much, not just as he comes to be better at swim, bike, and run, but also as he has found the training has made him a better person all around. He is getting ready to take on his first 70.3 at Chattanooga 70.3 in just a couple of short weeks. And so you can listen to his experience in my conversation with him, and that's going to be coming up a little bit later on. I know that you're going to enjoy it. Before we get to all of that, though, I want to take my customary moment just to thank all of my Patreon supporters who have decided that for about the price of a cup of coffee per month, they could sign up and help support this podcast, keep it improving, keep it going with increased technological prowess, and at the same time, avail themselves of bonus segments that come out about every month or so. The most recent of those bonus segments came out just last week and included a review of a couple of really interesting medical articles. I took a very deep dive into one medical article that looked at the role of inflammation on the vasculature and how that seems to have an impact on long-term outcomes of morbidity and mortality, and specifically how exercise may decrease inflammation and its effects on the vasculature. And the second study I look at in that bonus segment is how sunscreen can be beneficial to preventing skin cancer, but also doesn't seem to impact cooling when exercising in warm weather. You can get that bonus segment and all the others like it if you become a Patreon supporter. The support begins at $5 a month, but if you sign up at $10 per month, you will get yourself a gift in the form of a BOCO TriDoc podcast running hat, which will be yours for the keeping, and I'd love to share it with you. If you're interested in learning about any of this, please head over to my Patreon site at patreon.com/TriDoc podcast, where you can learn all about the different levels of support and how you can get access. And as always, you have my thanks just for considering. It's time again for the Medical Mailbag, that segment of the podcast when I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Juliet Hockman. Juliet, welcome once again.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be here, as always.
We are going to be tackling a question that didn't necessarily come from one of our listeners, but I kind of think of this as coming from all of the listeners because it's been all over the internet. But before we get to that, and a very special guest who's going to be joining us for that conversation, I wanted to just touch on something I brought up in the monologue. I talked about how my very brief experience with the Form goggles. I was really excited to get them and to try them, and I really didn't go anywhere as well as I had hoped. I didn't like them at all. As I mentioned, I found the screen annoying. The goggles gave me a terrible headache, and I'm not sure if it was the goggles themselves or if it was actually the display, because I was having a lot of trouble with the fit. I finally kind of got the fit okay where it wasn't leaking. And then I was swimming and I just was perpetually annoyed by the display was constantly just distracting me from swimming. And eventually I just turned it off. And I noticed that after I turned it off, my headache got better. And so I kind of wonder if the display was contributing to giving me a headache. Anyways, long story short, really didn't like them. The people at Forum were very nice. They took them back and, assuming will refund me because that's what they said they would do. I'm just curious. I know you said when I initially spoke to you, you said, oh yeah, you wouldn't use them, but you have athletes who use them and as do I. They love them.
Yep.
What's your sort of take on the whole thing?
I mean, sort of disclaimer up front here. I have not tried them, so I don't have firsthand experience. I do have athletes who use them, and they're athletes sort of across the experience spectrum from Kona qualifiers to people who are relatively new to the sport. I think it tends to be the athletes who are a little bit more motivated by data or really love to kind of delve into the data and want that real-time data all the time. Of course, there are athletes across the spectrum on their appetite for data as well. And they really love them. They love having the display. They love being able to tweak the display to see the information that they want to see. They find it keeps them on track. So I myself have no interest in using them. I find I'm probably overthinking in the pool as it is, and I don't really want any more information as I'm swimming. So that may be just because I've perhaps been swimming a little bit longer. I can use the clock. I can I'm quite a consistent swimmer across intervals. So I don't really know. I don't have any formula for who loves them and who doesn't, but I certainly have athletes who really love them. And I think if athletes are curious about them, they should go ahead and give them a try. And if it makes them better, more consistent, more on-task swimmers, all power to it.
Yeah, I've had a couple of athletes reach out to me and said they've tried the Swim Straight feature. They really like it. I at the end of the day, I'm not going to pay the monthly subscription just for that feature. It was not worth it to me. I feel like I can cite reasonably well enough that as an experienced triathlete, it doesn't give me that much of a incentive to pay the money for that. But more power to people who like them. And if that's something that is a selling point for you, then I agree, then go for it. But for me, it just was, I was surprised. I really thought I am a data geek. I love having more information. There's a feature called Head Coach, which tries to teach you how to place your head in the water. I found it was telling me to lift my head, which I thought was weird because when Lance has worked with us on video analysis, he always said that my head position was good. And this thing was telling me to lift my head, which I thought was unusual. And I didn't know if I should be believing it or not, and then a lot of the data it was showing me also came across a little bit as suspect. So the whole experience, again, I only swam with it once, but because the big thing for me was just the headache, and the annoying feature was enough to turn me off of it. But I agree with you 100%. There are so many people, I feel like I'm in the minority. So many people really love the form, and I would never tell them not to get it. It's just my experience, and I'm glad I tried them.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's what gets you to the pool, right? And so if this is just a little bit of a thing that gets you to the pool, I mean, for me, it's do I get to go to the bakery on the way home? Like whatever gets you to the pool is, and if that's a sort of an added Benny, especially for people who start swimming later in life, not people who swam growing up, for whom the swim maybe is the favorite part of triathlon. If it gets you to the pool and you love the data, hey man, give them a try. Go for it. I think another tool. And I'm really glad you tried them, right? Because I think that it's important that as athletes and as coaches, we sort of keep trying these new technologies as they come up and then decide for ourselves whether or not we like them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, speaking of bakeries, I think that gives us the opportunity to segue into our topic, our main topic for this segment, and also to introduce our guest. Our guest today is Alex Larson, a nutritionist, a dietitian who's been with the podcast a couple of different times. She actually holds the very prestigious, I think, honor of being the guest on the most successful episode I've ever recorded. That was the nutrition episode in which she was a co-guest with Celine Evans, also from LifeSport. Alex, welcome back to the TriDog podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
It's always an honor to be invited back. And I'm honored that I'm part of the number one most listened to episode.
Well, it's because nutrition is always the thing that everybody wants to hear about, right? And this is the first time that you and Juliet have been together. So Juliet, Alex, Juliet.
I know. I'm thrilled to meet you. And I am a big fan. I just want to do a shout out to Alex's Instagram, because it is one of those Instagrams where whether or not you have the volume on, you can see what she's talking about and laugh about it. And she's probably the most facially expressive person I know or follow on Instagram. You can almost know what she's going to say from her facial expression. She's very funny. So if you give her a follow, if you haven't already.
And my kids, I've got 3 kids now, and they all have very expressive faces. So I'm going to say that it came from their mother. Because I get comments of like, oh, they have so much expression. I'm like, yeah, I think that's from me.
Well, Alex, I've mentioned her Instagram as well because it is fantastic. I'll include a link to that as always in the show notes. Now, the reason Alex is here is because she reached out to me and mentioned what so many triathletes are kind of buzzing about on the interwebs these days. And that is the switch that Ironman has made for its on-course nutrition. And I use the word nutrition in air quotes. They have made a switch this year from Gatorade Endurance formula, which was handed out at all of the bike aid stations and all of the run aid stations in the past, to a new product called Mortal Hydration, which I think is an interesting name. It also has interesting packaging, but I wouldn't have chosen that font, but hey, it's not my choice. The inside scoop on Mortal Hydration is that it is a product that you can only get it from the feed. And the feed, of course, has a big tie-in sponsorship-wise with Ironman. They are paying, they being Mortal Hydration or the feed, one of them is paying to have this product on course at all of the races. And this has led to a lot of people having a lot of consternation because Ironman has always said, train with what's available on the course so that when you show up, that is what you have available to you in order to, again, air quotes, fuel. And that is the problem, right, Alex? What is the major problem here when we tell athletes to fuel with Mortal Hydration?
Well, I've got a few mental struggles about the product for endurance events. And it comes down to, like, first of all, I think people need to know that it's not like a replacement for Gatorade Endurance. It is quite different. So a couple things that I noticed right away is it's a lot less carbs. It's only 10 grams of carb per serving versus Gatorade Endurance was 22. So you're not going to be getting as much fuel in that. It's basically an electrolyte beverage. I'm not quite sure which product they're going to be offering on the course, if they're going to have the salty version or the regular version, because the salty version is over 900 milligrams of sodium chloride versus the regular, I think, is around 460. And using sodium chloride, I think, is really interesting because most sports formulas will use a sodium citrate, and that one is really well known for having an advantage in terms of absorption rate, which can provide like better electrolyte replenishment, and it's going to decrease your chance of having any GI issues out on the race course as well. So the carb issue and then the sodium is also a concern. And then the other kicker that I just don't know what's going on with why they added stevia to the product. Stevia offers a really interesting like aftertaste for a lot of people. There are very specific athletes that just find it just wrecks their gut and it doesn't sit well for them. So this is a product I would highly recommend people trialing in advance, making sure that they like it, make sure that their gut is going to handle it well, so that they feel comfortable using it out on the race course. And if they don't tolerate it well, then they're going to have to make sure that they have a really good alternative plan throughout their race so that they can keep themselves well fueled, rehydrating well, and having a good, safe, solid race.
Now, I want to touch on those things and kind of like independently. The first thing is the carbs.
Yeah.
I don't use, like, I have never gone to a race and used what they have on course. I've always brought my own nutrition because I don't want to rely on having to stop at aid stations. And I've never really loved Gatorade anyway. So to me, this change is kind of a nothing burger, but I understand that for a lot of athletes, this is a big deal because they've just showed up with water and grabbed Gatorade bottles. So I get it. The lack of fuel is a huge deal. As coaches, we tell our athletes, you need to be consuming in the order of 250 to 400 calories per hour on the bike. They're not getting anywhere close to that here. So how would you, if somebody's going to be relying on this for their electrolytes, how can they supplement? How should they be thinking about fueling on course then?
I mean, I personally wouldn't recommend putting the Mortal Hydration exclusively in their bottles. I would look to having some sort of other hydration mix that's going to be higher in carbs, because you mentioned it in calories. I look at it as like 60 to 90 grams of carb an hour, especially on the bike. The bike is the buffet. You can typically tolerate a lot higher carbohydrates. That way you go into your run on top of your nutrition. You're not already at a deficit. And so with something that only has 10 grams of carbs per serving, like, you're just not even going to get close to that 60 to 90 range. So you'd have to supplement with gels, energy chews, waffles, whatever it is that you prefer. But for my triathletes, I like to rely on a hydration mix for a good chunk of their carbs on the bikes. That way they aren't already tired of consuming gels when they go out on the run. And because you never know with flavor fatigue and what gut tolerability, especially during the run. So if they can kind of save those gels for the run, I find that's a really nice strategy to use typically. So yeah, and that's the thing. I'm like, I don't personally use Gatorade Endurance, but I think it's easily accessible for a lot of people around the US. It's not a bad product. I think just some people just prefer other ones. And so, yeah, I'm a little disappointed in this switch, to be perfectly honest. Like, I'm just kind of wondering, like, Ironman, what are you thinking? And I don't want to talk badly of Mortal Hydration either. Like, I'm sure the product is great for people needing a tasty electrolyte beverage, but for thousands of people out on the race course across North America, this is going to be a struggle for them when they're usually relying on Gatorade Endurance to be on the race course, to not have that and to have to pivot is going to be a little bit of a stressor for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think your accessibility point is a good one. You can get Gatorade at any convenience store, any gas station, anywhere, right? And so it's really easy to find. Mortal Hydration, you do have to order it specifically from the feed. I don't think it's available elsewhere. I mean, I think Jeff and I were talking about this a little bit before the show, and I think for most athletes, this is a matter of just education, understanding the difference. The Mortal Hydration is not a carby drink. Gatorade always was. And to better understand going into the race, as you would probably counsel your athletes, Alex, and I know that Jeff and I talk to ours, is really understanding what the requirements are for nutrition on the bike and on the run, and then figuring out a way to get them otherwise. Like Jeff, as an athlete myself, I never take what's on course. Well, sometimes I take the Mortons because they're so expensive, and so I like to take them. But anyway, but for the most part, to have a plan. Now, this is pretty easy in a 70.3. Like, I would argue in a 70.3, you can carry all the nutrition that you need for your entire race, both bike and run. For Ironman, it's a lot harder to carry that many calories on the bike, particularly if you're out there for 6, 7, 8 hours, which some athletes are on the bike. So that becomes a greater challenge because you do have to supplement on the back end of the bike and on the back end of the run in an Ironman. But I think, Jeff, perhaps you might weigh in on this as well, just making sure that athletes understand what they're supposed to be getting, counting up those carbs or calories, depending on how you do it, and knowing that you can be self-sufficient out there rather than depending on that back end Gatorade to throw those calories in at the end.
Yeah, I agree. I have always been self-sufficient in Ironman as well, because I just stop at special needs and I can load up with a second set. So I had always 3 bottles of nutrition to start with, and then I would pick up another 3 bottles, and each bottle was carrying like 400 calories. So I had enough for a 6-hour bike. I didn't bike 6 hours, but I had it. And if I needed more, you could get solids. So if you have a bento box or something, you could easily carry waffles or a bar or something like that. And I always encourage people to incorporate solid food as part of their nutrition plan, especially for an Ironman, because like you said, Alex, labor fatigue and just needing something else besides fluids. So there is a way to do it and be self-sufficient. I think that the fact that there's such high electrolyte concentration in these, and I don't know how they're giving these out. I don't know if they're giving these out as these little satchels or if they're giving them out as bottles.
They did comment on their Instagram page that they're going to have it pre-mixed and then have pre-filled bottles for the bike and then cups on the run. And then they'll have additional packets if you want to grab that, is what they said on their Instagram page.
Okay, well, that's useful, because I worried about that, because especially now that they're cracking down on littering, I wouldn't want people to all of a sudden get into trouble from the little packages. But I did want to return to something you mentioned earlier, which was the salt. And I have been harping on this for a while. I see people running with just ridiculous quantities of salt. And there's this false notion out there that salt is the cure-all for everything. And I see people with baggies of salt, and that people cramp and they're like, oh, I didn't take in enough salt. And then they're vomiting. It's, I didn't take in enough salt. And I'm like, well, actually, it's probably the opposite. If you're puking, it's because you have so much salt in your gut that your gut can't process anything else. And we know that too much salt causes vomiting. And I worry that, especially if they're, I'm hoping they're not going to give out the extra salty stuff, because I can see that causing trouble. But even with the regular stuff, if people are gulping this stuff down, that's a lot of salt in a potentially short amount of time. And I worry about people not being able to keep up with water, and they're going to end up, they're going to get into trouble with too much salt here. And I'm curious on your thoughts on that, just the quantity of salt here.
Yeah, I have a little bit of concerns with that, just because I think people need to look at it with, if you're going to be rehydrating and taking in electrolytes, you need to make sure that you're getting in the right concentration with your fluid. So it's not just about like, oh, I'm a salty sweater, I need to take in, let's say, 1,000 milligrams of sodium an hour to replenish my salt losses. You have to look at it as like, how much fluids are you typically losing in your sweat rate? And then how do we need to concentrate those fluids to make sure that we're rehydrating you at the right rate? So there are some athletes specifically that have done sweat testing. And I've seen some that are extremely salty sweaters. And so we do need to be careful about making sure that they're getting enough electrolytes with their fluids so that we're not putting them at risk for low sodium blood plasma levels, hyponatremia. Like, that's where in those specific situations we need to make sure. But if you're not if you're someone that like doesn't have a lot of like sweat stains on your clothes, you don't notice a lot of like salt drying on your skin, you're probably a pretty average or below average sweater. So then you don't need to be taking in that large quantity that would be in the mortal.
They also include small amounts of potassium, magnesium, and calcium. You do lose some of those in sweat. There's no question. I've looked at whether or not supplementing with these things is important. There's varying literature on that.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my understanding from what I've read in the stack of sports nutrition books behind me in my office here is that we usually have good enough potassium stores within our body that we don't need to be like scarfing down bananas for potassium on the race course. And same with like the potassium. And there's some potassium in there is fine, but I don't think we need like huge amounts of it. Really, it's all about getting in enough fluids, having the right concentration of electrolytes in there, and getting enough fuel and carbs in you on a regular basis to keep yourself from reaching that point of fatigue and having to slow down and get yourself in a sticky situation.
Yeah, and just like to give you a sense, like 25 milligrams of magnesium is trifling. When we give magnesium in the emergency department, we're giving grams of magnesium. So your total body stores of magnesium is gigantic, and giving somebody a 25 milligram amount is kind of just like waving magnesium at them and saying you want some, because it's really not.
It's basically just enough that they could say that there's magnesium in it.
So Julia, what are you going to tell your athletes as they head into the 70.3 season? I know what you and I are going to do.
Right.
What are you going to tell your athletes with respect?
It's not that different from the way I already talked to them about nutrition out there, which is plan on, depending on who they are and what they've trained for and their body size and type and everything else, carry your own calories on the bike. Most of my athletes will go with gels rather than carbs in their bottle. They'll go with electrolytes in their bottle, something that they're used to, and they will do gels, or if it's an Ironman, they might go something a little more solid because, as you say, they can absorb it better in an Ironman race. And then same thing on the run. I really talk to my athletes about using gels on the run and then using water rather than the carb drink that has always been in the middle, because we're always a little bit wary of putting a richer carbohydrate drink like Gatorade on top of gels, right? Because that's almost too much concentration of sugar. So it's not going to be very different from what I already talked to them about, which is utilizing sort of solid-based nutrition like gels or chews or something like that, and then either electrolytes or water. So most of all, just really having them understand as individuals, laying out their nutrition on the kitchen counter ahead of every ride and ahead of every brick, and then for the race to really understand what, counting the numbers, keeping the wrappers, all of those things, because sometimes during these races, athletes have to pivot too. Alex talked about flavor fatigue, particularly in those Ironman races. They'll get to a point and they'll be like, I cannot put that in my body. I just cannot taste that again. And so how are they going to pivot? So it's a larger sort of conversation on how to manage your nutrition independently, having a plan, and also being able to pivot a little bit at the end. So it's not going to be that different, I think, from what I already talked to athletes about.
Yeah, I go back to kind of a theme that Alex was saying earlier, which is almost a disappointment. What were these folks thinking? Because I get it's a business decision. Look, Ironman is hurting for financial reasons in a lot of ways. Signups are down. They're looking for sources of income. So if somebody's going to come to them and say, hey, I'm going to pay you this much money to put my product on course, I can understand why they would say, sure. But I kind of feel like they've got a duty to the athletes. And maybe someone was thinking, well, we're offering Morton gels, so that's the calories. We don't need to have a product that combines everything. But I don't know. You're rolling through an aid station. You kind of want to be able to get an all-in-one solution. And I think expecting an athlete to grab a bottle and also be able to grab adequate number of gels to fuel them till the next aid station, I think that's asking a bit much. And it seems to me that Ironman, I hate being critical because I really support Ironman. I feel like they do a great job in so many ways, but I kind of feel myself agreeing with you, Alex. I'm not sure that they made the grade here. And I like the feed. I shop at the feed, and look, they're in it as a business as well. But I kind of look at this product and I'm like, what niche is this filling? And how is this really an improvement on other things that are out there? I look at this as a step back. But that's me personally, my opinion.
I would have that. Oh, sorry. I mean, I just feel like I understand from a business expense where Ironman is coming from, but at the same time, like, it makes me not trust the company as much because I feel like our best interest wasn't, like, collectively as a whole, the athlete community's best interest wasn't considered when they were looking at the fuel options that are going to get served on the race course. So that's where I kind of struggle. But I will say, I am curious to hear which flavor they're going to use. I'm assuming it's going to be the margarita because it's the lemon lime flavor, and that's the most popular flavor among athletes. And I'm really hoping the volunteers get into this and they're yelling like margarita as they're handing out cups out on the race course. That's what I'm hoping for. Just
That's
for
good.
pure like morale booster for me.
I like that.
What were you going to say, Juliet?
I like that. Oh, I was just going to sort of play a slight devil's advocate, which is to both of your opinions. And I understand the sort of being disappointed in Ironman and expecting them to do better by their athletes. I also think, you know what, athletes have a choice as to where they enter, what races they enter, what race series they enter. And if you think about, if you were to go out on a mega hike somewhere in the wilderness, right, you wouldn't be depending on an aid station out there to give you a carb-based drink. You would be carrying all of your own and you would be self-sufficient. And one of the concepts of triathlon in general is that it is an individual event and you are self-sufficient. You can't take help from someone offering to change your tire. You can't take nutrition from someone on the course. You can't throw someone your t-shirt. You can't do any of those things on the course, right? So I guess I sort of think, yeah, okay, maybe not the best decision. We're going to have to pivot a little bit and athletes have to go and educated. But if you're going to go in for a 5 to 19 or 18-hour race, 17-hour race, as an athlete, you should probably do a little bit of homework ahead of time anyway, because this is a big endeavor. So I guess I'm going to move a little bit away from that opinion and say we shouldn't expect sort of as much service, I guess. I'm not really sure, or as much support. Athletes should go in educated to this or to any physical challenge that they put themselves up to. So maybe I'm being a little hard line.
I would agree with that too. I think that's a great thought of how I just look at it collectively as a whole for athletes. I'm like, okay, so they're in a pinch and they're needing some fuel, and what's going to be the best option for them to grab at the aid stations? And I'm like, ooh, this one wouldn't be my first choice. I'll just say that. And I do love the feed. I mean, from what I can see on the Mortal Hydration's website is like they have a kombucha product and then they have this new sports fuel. And Becca Sheps is the founder of it. She's been a lifelong athlete. She has type 1 diabetes, so that might be why she did a lower sugar product. I mean, I don't want to badmouth Ironman or Mortal or the feed. I think all are probably wonderful companies, but collectively as a whole for athletes, if I were going to pick a product, this would not be it.
Sure.
All right. Well, what do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. You can let me know by sending me an email at tri_doc@icloud.com. You can join the private TriDoc Podcast Facebook group, of which I'm pretty sure, Alex, you're not a member.
Am I not a member?
I understand how that... If you're not, you need to be.
Well,
you might be. Yeah. Well, if you're not, you know how to join. You search for the TriDoc Podcast on Facebook. You answer the 3 very easy questions. Join the group, and you can let us know what you think about this decision of Ironman and about Mortal Hydration. And of course, you can also ask your questions for the medical mailbag there so that we can consider them and answer them on a future show. Alex Larson, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention and to joining us for this conversation. It was always a pleasure to have you here and to have your insights on this topic. And Juliet, of course, thank you once again for joining me. I look forward to our next conversation on the next program. And of course, I'll be seeing you live very shortly for our annual Life Sport Butt Kicker Camp in North Carolina. Looking forward to that. Thank you, ladies, both for being here. I really appreciate it. Alex Larson, Juliet Hockman on the Medical Mailbag.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
My guest on the program today is Tyler Pedersen. Tyler played a lot of different sports growing up. Principally, he played football all the way through college. And as a football player, he spent a lot of time in the weight room, and that resulted in his putting on 30 pounds of muscle. After college, though, he didn't work out quite so much, and as a result, he found himself at 230 pounds in not too long of a time. He was always going up and down in weight from 205 to 230 because he couldn't find a good system. Like so many, he'd find himself on some kind of diet program and workout, but then he just couldn't stick with it. Tyler also says that he hasn't always had a great relationship with alcohol in the past, and after his dad passed away in early 2023, he decided he didn't want to drink anymore. It's not that he was an alcoholic, he just felt that it was time to put family and other things ahead in his life. He started biking back in 2017 and found that he really enjoyed it, and although he had never really swam and actually hated running, he decided that he wanted to start training for triathlons because, of course, what else would you do if you don't swim and hate running? He attempted his first sprint last September, and although he failed swimming after just 150 yards, he was still able to bike and run, and like so many of us, found himself hooked. He went on to hire a coach. He's now swimming 4,000 to 5,000 yard workouts. He's gone on to increase his bike FTP to 244 watts and his 5K run time down to 20 minutes and 54 seconds, and he signed up to do the Chattanooga and Louisville 70.3s this year. So in for, what is it? In for a pound, in for, I can't even remember the saying, but in for whatever, in for a penny, in for a pound. That's it. But right now I've gotten him to settle down just long enough to chat with me here on the Tri Doc podcast about his journey to triathlon and how triathlon has helped him reframe his life. Tyler, thanks so much for joining me here on the Tri Doc podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for welcoming in and making time for me. I know we had to reschedule, but appreciate you carving out some time to have me on.
Absolutely. Well, I need to know, first and foremost, for a guy who hated running and didn't swim, I come from a background where I had to learn how to swim as an adult. I never hated running, but what in the world got you thinking about triathlons?
Again, I really, in 2017, I bought a bike and I really enjoyed the cycling part of it. I lived out here in the country roads. I really just enjoyed doing that. And then I'm a competitive person, right? I come from a football background. I come from a baseball background. And those were all team sports. I've always played in team sports, but never an individual sport. And so I told myself, I want to push myself and to do something I have never done before and push my body to the limit of what it can do. And I said, why not try to do something that I've never done before, which is swimming. I've never been a competitive swimmer, just been in the ocean. And then push myself to enjoy running and to enjoy pushing my body to the ability I can. And then also, I love just doing the individual competing. How can I push myself against other people? And what does that look like? So that's really what pushed me into triathlons, was because the individual competitiveness and be able to push my body and my mind to the maximum ability that I can.
I'm going to push back a little bit because I'm fascinated by this. I'm always interested in what brings people to multi-sport. There's a lot of ways to do individual sports. You could have just ran a marathon. You could have just biked a century. What was your introduction to multi-sport? What was it that made you think, oh, I know, I'm going to do one of those?
I really don't know. I just was researching it. I've been I follow people that have done Ironmans, and people are like, Ironman has been the most satisfying thing that I have ever done in my life. And it's pushed me out of my comfort zone and it's pushed me all the way to where I want to be and to understand the capabilities that my body can go to. So as we talked about me coming off not drinking alcohol, I really wanted to push my body and my mind as far as I could take it. So why not try to do an introduction to triathlon, see if I really liked it. That's why I started with the sprint and then move on to the 70.3s or move on to the Ironman. That really was my whole schedule and what I was going to do. But as we all know, like, schedules are meant to be broken sometimes, and we take a different path to get to our end result. So that's really why it was. It's just to push myself into something I've never done before with swimming and to really start enjoying the running aspect. And this was a way that you didn't have to be in the gym pushing weights or anything like that. So I wanted to prove that you could actually build muscle by doing multi-sport as well.
What have you gotten out of the process so far? How has it empowered you? What have you learned so far?
So what I've learned is that you really need someone to help you along in triathlons, to be completely honest. One, I think the community is very awesome. I want to go into my first sprint race. When we showed up, my wife and I, it was our anniversary and we did the sprint race. She watched me and she was just like, I can't believe the people here just coming up and saying, hey, and the atmosphere around. So one, that's been really cool, understanding the community around triathlon and the support that we've had. So I would say, one, you need to hire a coach or have someone on your side to start triathlons. Like I did try to do it on my own for 6 weeks and didn't work. What I've learned is hiring a coach has empowered me to focus on family while I train and focus on other things than just setting up my workout. So I have my workout systemized for me. So it's really beneficial for me that I just go into Training Perks every week. I see what my coach has me ready to go do. And then I do that workout every day. So that's what's been helping. the other thing, I think my fitness level has gone up tremendously since I started this back in July. Today, I was in the pool. I did 500 to start. Then I did 20 100s with a 30-second rest, and then between 15 and 30 seconds. I started those with a 30-second rest, and I ended the last 5 with 15-second rest. So I'm able to push my body more than I could into a sport that I never thought I would enjoy. And then it's actually helped me not drink anymore either. So not saying I'll ever go back to alcohol, but that's another reason I picked this up, is that if I'm truly going to push myself to the maximum of my ability, I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to have to do any of that or putting that in my way. It's also empowered me to be a better husband. It's empowered me to be a better father. All around, I think it's just been a way positive change in my life because of my mental status of where I am and just the clarity that I have. So,
yeah, I love that. That's great. Did you have to do anything special to kind of learn how to swim, or did you just kind of get in the pool and flail and just figure it out?
So the first time I tried to swim, we were on a vacation in July, and I was like, hey, I'm just going to go swim, right? I got my new Garmin watch, and things like that. So I'm just going to go out in the ocean and swim 0.3 miles. That's nothing. So I'm going out there. I go into this water. It's so cold. So it's on Lake Michigan, and it's July, but the water is probably 50 to 60 degrees. It's freezing up there. And so I'm like, I'm going to go out for a swim, and I'm swimming. I set my watch. I'm like 100 yards out. I'm like, I'm exhausted. This is not going to be good. So then I came back in, and after that trip, I said, I need to spend more time swimming. I watched a whole bunch of videos. I was looking at how to do the side where you enter the pool and you do the side thing and with one arm and you come back with the other arm, the shark fin as well. I watched a whole bunch of like how to swim videos. And then when we got back, I didn't have a pool anywhere. So good thing it was summer, but there's a lake about 20 minutes away from my house. And we had a season pass to that park, and they had a beach, and they had a really nice swimming area that I just went in and just started swimming like 50 yards at a time, 100 yards at a time. And I would start out just swimming to see how far I could go to the first time without getting tired. Again, I was like at 50, 100, 150, 200. I'm like, okay, I think I can get to 500 yards by the time the triathlon comes. So I started doing a couple drills here and there and kept swimming and felt that I did enough to get ready for the triathlon. Apparently I did not. There's a lot more to it than just practicing it this way and that way. But yeah, that was the only really training that I had, was going to YouTube and having that lake be the swimming pool. So, and I did purchase a wetsuit before the triathlon too to help my buoyancy. So,
well, that's pretty impressive. And since after that sprint, have you done any formal training, or still just kind of on your own, just picking up tips and tricks from YouTube?
No, so immediately after that sprint triathlon, the guy who runs the sprint triathlons here in the area, he's a coach as well. I looked him up. I told my wife, I said, if I'm going to do this, I need the right training. And she's like, I agree 100%. So I reached out to this guy. His name's Zach Rubel. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I need your help. I was at your event. I'm the one who failed on the swim. He's just laughing. And so I said, I need your help. So we come to agreement, and he's been my trainer and my coach since October, and it's been nonstop in the pool 3 or 4 times a week. He's big on a lot of the swimming, swim a lot, swim hard, and put a lot of yards in, and it'll pay off. And I feel like I feel like today I could go and swim the 1.4 in Chattanooga, whether that be competitively or not. I think I could still do it in a wetsuit. That's how comfortable I do feel in the water right now.
Well, the nice thing about Chattanooga, of course, is you'll have that current assist, which is going to be very helpful and will definitely benefit you. So it'll be a little bit easier than even the 150 was, or what the 500 was supposed to be in the fall. Tell me about the running, because you hated running, and now you're finding yourself pushing yourself to do something you didn't enjoy, and obviously doing quite well at it. 5K time at 20:54 is rather sprightly. So how have you gotten yourself to enjoy running?
So on the running aspect, I started, again, here's how I started. I was a college football player and a high school baseball player. So I was always sprinting or doing this and this and this, and I just never got in the mode of enjoying running. I didn't understand that why would people run for 5, 10, 15 miles? I never got it. I didn't. And the thing about runner's high, I'm like, that's probably not a thing. And so I started out running in July again as well, and just running up and down my road. We live in the country. So I would be like, just how fast can I do how fast can I do a 5K, right? And I was going up and down the road, and it was like, I was running 8.5 minute to 9 minute miles, but my heart rate was like 175 to 177, just pushing like the maximum zones that I could. After the triathlon, I did okay on the running part of it. But then after that, Zach was like, hey, we're going to get you in some good running programs. So, but the first thing that I did after that is I went to the Fleet Feet, and I got proper running shoes because I was running in cross training shoes. So old Pumas, cross trainers. I did get the Caterpillar shoestrings. And so I could slip them on the triathlon. I did a whole bunch of research to say, hey, I'm going to be like fast in transition. So I got those, but I went and got Hoka's, the Clifton 9s, and then Ultima. I can't remember the model of those, but I felt like after I bought those, my running just exploded because I had the proper gear on to be able to run the distance. So then we just started putting together the runs. I did a 5K in August, and then that was a 7-minute 5K, I believe. I did another one in end of October to get my zones, and that was a 24-minute 5K. Then I just did one this past weekend in 22-degree weather, and that was the 2054 I just did. So I just have felt like I've pushed myself into my training to be able to get to those numbers already. So.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times about the gear, and I've talked a lot about for new people coming into the sport about how expensive it can be and about how you have to be careful about getting into the sport, about not overextending yourself financially. What have you found as a new person coming into the sport? Has the barrier to entry in terms of price been really significant? Is it something that put you off in any way? Do you think that it's something you would advise other people getting into the sport to be careful about? What's your take on? Because it's something I worry about as somebody who's been in the sport for a long time. I know that it's an expensive sport, and I know that it's something that's keeping more people from getting into it. So what's your experience been like as somebody coming into the sport in terms of how much money you've spent? You don't have to give me actual amounts, but also what would your advice be for other people who are getting into it in terms of how to do it without breaking the bank?
I think so. I was very fortunate to be able to have a bike already, right? I would say the most expensive thing, it was just a regular road bike. It's a felt racing bike, and it's from 2017. And that's okay to do on the sprint. That's okay to do your first, second, third triathlon on to see if that's something that you enjoy. I think financially, it's a low barrier to entry if you want to try it to see if you like it. Now, if you really like it and you're like me and have addictive personalities and go all in once you enjoy something, then it can get financially prohibitive. And so, for example, I went into my first triathlon only paying for a wetsuit, right? And I got the Xterra one. And it was, I think, on sale for $299, $300, somewhere around there, right? That was really the only expense that I had because I already had the bike, I had some nutrition items. So I think all in the first triathlon, I had less than $400 in with the entry fees, the membership, and all that. Now, though, we look at it as that I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it competitively, and I'm going to go all in on some of the stuff. So I went online, I searched for used stuff. I spent months searching for used equipment because it's out there. Groups on Facebook, groups everywhere. People are willing to sell it for pennies on the dollars just to get out of the sport because it's taking up space. So my recommendation is to buy used equipment and make sure that you buy it locally so you can go and try to see if the bike fits or what you're going to do. Because, for example, I picked up this Scott Plasma. It's a 2013 Scott Plasma. I picked it up for $1,050. I'm okay saying that. It came with shoes and a helmet. And then I went and got a bike fit that was $300 to make sure it fit me correctly. And then I upgraded to my what did I upgrade? My crank arms. So after the fact, I upgraded my crank arms, I upgraded my seat. So I was able to upgrade and have something that was, to me, very inexpensive compared to other things that you see in the sport. So that was my biggest upgrade. When I say I was going to go all in, I wanted to do it on the bike because that was my strong suit. I wanted some gear that was that I was able to produce the most power out of and be comfortable. So when we're looking at this, when you start out, you can do it very cheaply. But when you start getting into everything that you want to do, then that's where you can start getting expensive. The coaching, the nutrition, the bike, the footwear. But if you do it right and go the used route and watch your budget, I think you can do it correctly.
Yeah, and you got a great bike, and you didn't really spend that much money. I mean, all in for about $2,000 is pretty good for a Scott Plasma. That's really an excellent ride. What are you hoping to accomplish now? I mean, you've got these 270.3s this year. Chattanooga is a very big race. That's going to be obviously a new experience for you, and one that I know you're going to enjoy. I've done that race several times. It's a fantastic race. It's just a very well organized event, and one that I know you're going to enjoy just because the experience is so great. Louisville's a new event, but it's getting a lot of excitement. I did the Ironman in Louisville, and I'm sure the half is going to be equally well done and probably an excellent. I haven't seen the course maps, but I would imagine it's going to be a beautiful bike course, and the run will probably go through some of the same places that the Ironman run did. So what are you hoping to get out of your races this year?
One, just to finish, Jeff, to be completely honest, I call myself I'm a triathlete, but I've never finished one. And that's really, it does bug me a little bit here and there. But I just want to finish, to be completely honest. And I was training just to finish, but the more I train, the more I feel I can be competitive. So my FTP in the bike started at 216 and we're up to 244 now with the training. My 5K was 27 minutes. Now we're down to 20:54. My swim pace at a 500, probably around a 150-ish or so. I need to work on my swimming a lot more, but it's just really to finish the first one, Chattanooga, and then really go into Louisville with more of a competitive attitude. I do say I want to finish Chattanooga under 5 hours, which I know it's a huge thing for your first triathlon or a first big race, but I'm one that has goals. And if I don't have a goal, that I have nothing to go towards and work towards. So my coach is like, yeah, that's a pretty big time to accomplish for something on your first time. But he's like, I'll work the numbers. He's like, I just don't know what the bike's going to, the bike might be the biggest thing for you on that, an unknown. But right now it's just a finish. My family, so I booked these. Chattanooga is about 8 hours away from where I'm at. Louisville is about 5. So I booked these to have a family experience with to take my family down as well. So we're going out as a family. We're doing the event as a family. We're having a vacation. So again, it's just to, one, finish Chattanooga. I would love to do it under 5 hours and then head into Louisville and really see how competitive I can be in that for my age group and for not just the overall, but just for my age group. I just want to see where I'm at. And I think I'll know where that is in Chattanooga. And the reason I did Chattanooga and Louisville is because my weakest point is my swimming. Both downriver swim. So I wanted to give myself the best chance to be able to finish going into the 70.3. I know I can get through the biking and the running pretty easily. It's just going to be the swimming.
Well, you're not my athlete, but I'll tell you what I tell all the athletes I coach, which is never go in with time goals, especially not for your first one, because then what ends up happening is you spend the whole day thinking to yourself, oh, I'm behind my time. And you end up kind of losing the plot. So go in with that attitude of I just want to finish and have my best day possible. Create your plan, stick to your plan during the race, and you'll have a great day. That's really what we can all hope for anytime we show up on the start line. And it sounds like you're doing everything right and having a great time doing it, which is really, I think, the most important thing. What do you envision for your future? Obviously, you're thinking, I could tell you're thinking full distance. So what are you thinking about for the future?
Yeah, I really wanted to do the 70.3s this year and see how I did and then see how competitive I was in those. And I don't want to talk about times and I want to get to that. But next year, I think it'll be maybe doing another round of 70.3s and going to 2026 with Ironman. And you as a coach, you might be able to tell me more, but I don't know if I have the time to train for an Ironman right now. I have a 4 and a 2.5-year-old little girls. And my training, a lot of my training comes early in the morning. And so it's already a lot for me to be able to do the training, to work, with the girls, my wife, being a husband. We all get that as triathletes. You're spread very thin when you start training. So I don't know how much more training I'm going to need to up my training to get ready for an Ironman. And I don't think I'm ready to do that yet with the family, with my girls being so young and our vacation plans and other things that I can't commit to that. I think I can only commit to the 70.3 training. And so that's the other thing, right? Is that when we look at things, we still got to be a family man. We've still got to be a husband. We still have to be all these things along with being a training for triathlons. And sometimes I think we get caught up in like, I got to train because that's how I was first off. Like I will tell you what, in February, I took 2 weeks off of swimming just because I couldn't get to the pool. Work was in the way. The pool got closed. Like there's just a lot of things that happen in your regimen. And then you finally step back and take a break and you're like, maybe I needed that break and maybe it's okay to miss a workout here or there, miss a workout there and spend the time with the family or spend your time with your wife because they let us do a lot of the training and get it done. But they also need to come before that as well. So.
Well, for someone who's only been in the sport for a short period of time, you're finding a lot of the insights that I think a lot of triathletes don't find for many, many years, including myself. And I just want to touch base on a couple of those because you mentioned this idea that family is so important and work and everything else. And I will tell you that as a coach, I always tell my athletes that it's my job to create a plan that fits with your life because training needs to fit your life, not the other way around. And too many athletes make the mistake of trying to make their life fit the training, and then nothing happens. It doesn't work because they sacrifice in their life, they sacrifice in their training, and they're not happy in either. And so it's so important to make sure that your training plan fits into what you have available in your life in order to achieve your goals. The other thing I just wanted to say is that you're absolutely right. This is a team sport. Although you're the person who is out there doing the event, if you don't have the support of your team, your spouse, your children, whoever else is part of that support group, then there's no point in doing this because you are going to create problems, stress in that relationship. And I've told this story on this podcast many times that whenever I am coming up with my own race plans with my own season schedule, I always sit down with my family. We sit down together and we talk about these are the things that I'm thinking about. This is the races I'm thinking about doing. What do you guys think? And for example, I will tell you that I did Ironman last in 22. That's when I qualified for Kona last. And I didn't do Ironman in 23 because my family didn't want me to dedicate that much time. And 24, I'm not doing Ironman. I'm just doing 70.3 again. And when you talk about how much time is involved, it's not insignificant. I mean, part of it is what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to qualify for world championships? Are you trying to finish at the top of your age group? Or are you just trying to finish? I mean, all of those factor into it. But I will tell you that it is possible to do an Ironman training half Ironman hours. So doing the same kind of training for half Ironman. But then in the last 4 months before the event, you've got to ramp it up by about 50%. If you want to finish the Ironman. If you want to do more than that, then it's going to require a bigger time investment. But that's a discussion that you need to have with whoever your coach is.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, I think I'm going to be a 70.3 athlete. I think that's where my sweet spot's going to be because of the training and stuff. But I do really want to do 1 or 2 Ironmans and say that I did them. But I think it's going to have to be the 70.3s are going to be the sweet spot.
Yeah. And there's absolutely no shame in that because the 70.3 is a big deal. And it sounds like you're doing everything right to complete those. So kudos to you and kudos to you for finding the sport and for really going all in on it. I really applaud your efforts. Tyler Pedersen is a kind of a man about town when it comes to triathlon. He's a guy who came to it with no swimming at all and hating running and yet here he is training for his first 70.3 that's coming up in Chattanooga and then Louisville afterwards. We connected online through a Facebook group that connects podcast hosts and guests, and I'm really happy that we had a chance to connect. Tyler, thanks so much for joining me on the TriDoc podcast. It's been a pleasure having this conversation, and I wish you all the best in your training in the months to come, and we'll follow you on the day in May when you race Chattanooga for the first time.
Thanks, Jeff. See ya.
And that's it for another episode. The TriDoc Podcast is produced and edited by me, Jeff Sankoff, along with my interns.
I'm Agent Johnson. This is Special Agent Johnson.
Oh, how you doing?
No relation.
I'm Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc. I'm in charge here.
Not anymore.
Those interns are Ian Johnson and Ben Johnson. You can find the show notes for everything discussed on the show today, as well as archives of previous episodes at tridocpodcast.com. Do you have questions about any of the issues discussed on this episode, or do you have a question that you'd like for me to consider answering on a future episode? Send me an email at tri_doc@icloud.com, or join the private TriDoc Podcast Facebook group on Facebook, and you can submit your questions there. If you're interested in coaching services, please visit tridoccoaching.com or lifesportcoaching.com, where you can find a lot of information about me and the services that I provide. You can also follow me on the TriDoc Podcast Facebook page, TriDoc Coaching on Instagram, and the TriDoc Coaching YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this podcast, I hope that you'll consider leaving me a rating and a review, as well as subscribe to the show wherever you download it. And of course, there's always the option of becoming a supporter of the podcast at patreon.com/TriDoc Podcast. The music heard at the beginning and the end of the show is Radio by Empty Hours and is used with permission. This song and many others like it can be found at ReverbNation.com, where I hope that you'll visit and give small independent bands a chance. The TriDoc Podcast will be back again soon with another medical question for me to answer and another interview with someone in the world of multisport. Until then, remember 1121 and train hard, train healthy.